So for this unit, we're going to start with the 1920s, talk about the changing American ideals during this era, and also mass media. For the 1920s, because we'd gone through this cataclysmic event, World War One, times had changed, and many Americans began to look at the way things had been done, the ideas that governed those decisions, and began to question those because in their mind, that those were the ideals and the morals that led to World War One, and we were going to try to change the way we thought to avoid more cataclysmic events like World War One. So it began to challenge and question these old values and morals of the era preceding World War One. This led to the era of the flapper, who you can see on the right there. There was a young woman who dressed differently, had shorter hair than usual, had her arms exposed, and a much shorter hem skirt than was traditionally accepted. She drank and smoked in public, and she wore makeup in public. So this was a changing time for Americans, but it really was a time for young people, 30 and younger, to go out and have fun. You know, we had survived this huge event. Now we got to get our party on. Speaking of the flapper, let's look at women in the 20s. Here you can see this group of women. They have their hats on. They are dressed in the typical fashion of this era. Um, for them, it was fun to wear hats, to get their hair done, to dye their hair, to put on more makeup than they used to. It was scandalous to a lot of people, especially the way they wore makeup and had their arms exposed and backless dresses and stuff. But for them, it was just a matter of going out and asserting themselves, trying to steal a new role in society. For the longest time, and during this era as well, the vast majority of women had a secondary role at work. The vast majority of women were really just supposed to be housewives. And if you were 30 years old and not married, you probably got fired from your job because you were expected to work when you were younger until you found a man, then get married and raise a family. Most women didn't vote, even though they had the right to vote. When they did vote, the only options they usually had were men. And America at this time was moving in two different directions. America was moving from rural areas to urban areas, from farms to cities, and 6 million Americans during this 1920s era moved. And that change, that movement also affected African Americans who were leaving the South because of the poll tax, all the other Jim Crow laws that were keeping them from asserting their rights. They were leaving the South and coming up to the North and finding really that the North wasn't all that they had envisioned it to be. Immigrants were moving from Mexico and Canada. They were coming over from Mexico. We were going into Mexico, recruiting them to come over here and work in fields in Southern California and Arizona, New Mexico. They were starting their own neighborhoods, which became known as barrios, which were Spanish-speaking neighborhoods with their own schools. And also, people were leaving the city, the downtown parts of the city, and beginning to create suburban areas around the city. Trolley cars were still the rage, but it was during the 1920s that trolleys, unfortunately, were replaced by buses. Ugh, look at that. Which would you rather have, that awesome-looking trolley on the right or that ugly bus on the left? Well, buses were cheaper. They didn't have to maintain rails for the trolleys or electrical wires, and of course, the big car companies pushed for buses into cities because that's the way they could make money. We had some heroes back then. Charles Lindbergh flew from New York to Paris, first man to successfully fly across the Atlantic Ocean. Amelia Earhart was the first woman to fly across the Atlantic, and she also was the first person to fly from Hawaii to California. When she tried to circle the world, as most of you know, she got lost, and her whereabouts are unknown. She disappeared probably in the islands in the Pacific someplace. And let's go over a few more heroes in the next part of this lecture.